in the fog-cloaked mountains of California, where the rugged peaks of the Santa Lucia stretch toward the sky. A sense of unease once lingered amongst the locals.
There were 3 of them, just standing there.
For centuries, whispers have echoed of tall, shadowy figures that silently watch from the ridgelines, ominous sentinels known only as the Dark Watchers. No one knows who or what they are.
You mustn't look at them. You must never look at them.
They appear at twilight, standing like spectres, shrouded in darkness. Those who've dared to approach these entities swear they vanish into thin air, leaving behind only a dreaded chill.
We ran when we saw them. They were everywhere.
When the sun dips low, something ancient watches from the shadows. Tales of the Dark Watchers have permeated the mountains of the Santa Lucia Range. Located on the central California coast, hikers report seeing silhouetted figures gathered on the ridges of these mountains, or lurking in and amongst the trails. Some say that they are as much as 10 feet tall, made even bigger by large towering hats or black billowing capes. Whilst these strange spectres never seem to approach or engage those who stumble upon them, the mere sight of such foreboding figures is enough to give witnesses a fright they won't soon forget. Where these watchers came from cannot be determined, but the appearances of such creatures can be traced as far back as the 1700s, where Spanish settlers dubbed the shadowy beings as Los Vigilantes Oscuros, literally the Dark Watchers. The mid-1800s would see the arrival of the Anglo-Americans, and after signing a treaty to end the Mexican War, a vast portion of the Southwest, including present-day California, was ceded to the United States. Yet even with this capturing of territory, the Dark Watchers themselves could not be moved, and the new settlers would too find themselves experiencing the same sinistrous feeling of being watched from the hills. Today, it is generally agreed that the Dark Watchers, if there is such a thing, mean humanity no harm. They appear, for all intents and purposes, to be more observant than aggressive, as their name implies. All attempts to approach these entities have yielded few results, with many reporting that the Dark Watchers simply disappear when someone gets too close. Other legends say that these beings cannot be approached with modern technology, and that it is only those who equip themselves with archaic hiking equipment that will have a chance to see them up close. Much of the mythology surrounding the Dark Watchers has often been attributed to the indigenous people of Chumash, who had inhabited the central and southern coastal regions of California. Yet, after having consulted some texts on Chumash mythology, including December's Child, a compendium of oral narratives by the Chumash people, there is little that adequately reconciles the idea that these Dark Watchers had originated from this culture. With this in mind, it could mean one of two things: that we are either missing certain stories from the Chumash people that are now lost to history, or that the Dark Watchers only appeared in the 1700s, when the Spanish settlers first arrived, for they were the first ones to record seeing them. What spurred on these entities to make themselves known to these early settlers? Why have they been so interested in observing us for over 300 years? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly do they want? Whilst the Dark Watchers will likely always remain a dark and eerie mystery, much of their disposition was given to us in the first half of the 20th century by two writers in particular. One of these writers was John Steinbeck, who had been enveloped with the legends of the Dark Watchers since he was a child. It's likely that such a belief was passed down to Steinbeck by his mother, for in one account it is said that as a child, Steinbeck's mother would leave fruit or nuts as part of an offering to the Dark Watchers when she went to school. When she returned home from school, she would find flowers in the place of these offerings, perhaps a form of gratitude on behalf of the apparitions, or maybe a very peculiar coincidence. In any case, it is such accounts that may have inspired Steinbeck to write Fright, a story about a young man named Pepe, who is sent into town by his mother. Unlike the tales told to him by his mother though, the Watchers in Steinbeck's story sound much less romantic and far more villainous. Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them, and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail, and minded his own business. Just as John Steinbeck may have been inspired by his mother to write about the Dark Watchers, so too was his son, Thomas Steinbeck, who would later claim to have actually seen the Dark Watchers throughout the Santa Lucia Mountains, most notably a rugged section known as the Big Sur. The second writer who contributed to the lore surrounding the Dark Watchers was poet Robinson Jeffers, who in his 1937 collection, Such Counsels You Gave to Me and Other Poems, tells of a protagonist who comes face to face with one of these entities. He thought it might be one of the Watchers, who are often seen in this length of coast range, forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They come from behind ridges to watch. But when he approached it, he recognized the shabby clothes and pale hair, and even the averted forehead and concave line from the eye to the jaw, so that he was not surprised when the figure turning toward him in the quiet twilight showed his own face. Then it melted and merged into the shadows beyond it. One of the main explanations for such sightings of these Dark Watchers comes from psychology and involves hallucination or some kind of stark misinterpretation brought about by either exhaustion or isolation. As many of these sightings come from hikers, it is entirely plausible that the physical toll taken on travelers may invoke a subtle, delirious state, where they are more likely to see things that aren't there. Dehydration, prolonged exposure to the sun, or simple fatigue might also contribute to one seeing things, and because the lore around the Dark Watchers is so prominent in these areas, one's imagination may supply such an image of tall, dark spectres, with canes and hats. Another less common suggestion is that the Dark Watchers could be a result of infrasound, that which can be generated by wind and cause feelings of uneasiness and anxiety, which may lend to the notion that people feel as if they are being watched. In more extreme cases, infrasound can be associated with paranormal sightings, where again, those influenced by the local lore may see things that are concocted by their imagination. Another theory is that normal shadows, say those of the trees swaying in the wind, can be obscured by fog or mist. When this happens, these shadows can be twisted into more humanesque looking shapes by our imagination. It's a phenomena known as pareidolia, and is essentially our brain working overtime in an effort to make sense of what it is seeing. Sometimes, like in this instance, where the subject is obscure or ambiguous, our brains, pattern-seeking machines that they are, will attempt to reconcile the subject as something we are more familiar with. In this case, a humanoid spectre that's 10 feet tall and brazenly staring at us seems to do the trick. You might compare this phenomena to staring at clouds, whereby, if one focuses long enough, a distinct shape of an object or an animal might soon start to take place. Others compare pareidolia to Rorschach tests, where again, people are seeing and interpreting shapes or objects based on whatever our brain decides it sees. Yet another theory to explain the Dark Watchers is the Brocken Spectre, sometimes known as the Mountain Spectre, and made famous by a similar account on Brocken Peak in Germany, where for hundreds of years, locals had reported seeing similar shadowy figures. The Brocken spectre is essentially an optical illusion that can occur in certain natural conditions, such as when the sun is at a particular angle and there is a certain amount of mist in the air. With this explanation, shadows, possibly those of the hikers themselves, are cast onto the already misty peaks of the mountains. If the sun happens to be behind the observer, the mist can interfere with the shadow and distort its shape so that it appears large and eerie. Considering the Dark Watchers are usually giant in size, this could be a plausible explanation. Furthermore, if the mist was to suddenly shift or break, the shadow in question can vanish in the blink of an eye. Again, a possible explanation as to why the Dark Watchers are said to disappear. For some people, however, particularly the locals in and around the Big Sur, the Dark Watchers are not the result of our pattern-seeking brains, nor the construct of some atmospheric illusion, but rather real creatures, real beings that have lurked in the mountains for hundreds of years. Perhaps the only thing more ominous than the characteristics of these ghostly guards is the fact that no one knows why they're here, and no one knows what they want. Could these seemingly indifferent sentries be watching us for a purpose? Or are they waiting for someone to wander too close? As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.